everybody. Welcome to episode 23 of the Ramblin' Reverend and Reverend's Ramblings. And I hope that people try to see and read this shirt. Bonus to whoever can read this shirt. Put the translation in the comments below. The last week was pretty interesting. My days get kind of mixed up as I am thinking through what to do for these podcasts, since David and I are doing our post-sermon summaries and deep dives, which I really want folks to watch those. Those are really fun, and we get into the weeds, but that actually made me think a lot about how the purpose of this whole podcast was for former athletes, especially cross-country athletes. I think specifically about Ethan Dennis, or Abby Stevenson, Noah France, Isaac Jones, or Meg Simmons, or Aiden Parks, where like those are the ones that I had a lot of really long runs with over the years, and how just had awesome conversations during those runs. And so my last conversation that I had with David, which would be the Sermon Secrets from Acts chapter 5, was more like one of those long runs where it's just talking about things and digging into it. So hopefully, if you're one of my athletes, you'd please listen to those. It's pretty long. It's just under an hour. But this last week, just thinking about what day it is, because today's Friday, and there's been so many canceled days of school in the last 2 weeks that just trying to remember what was last week, what was this week, has been pretty interesting. The biggest event from last weekend would have been going to a Michigan State basketball game. And I had never been to a Michigan State basketball game. I'd been to a few Michigan State football games during high school, and a Michigan State hockey game. And feel free to ask my parents about Michigan State football games and any interesting memories of me going to those. But Michigan State basketball has been what I've been a fan of since being little. So I have not always been a Dallas Mavericks fan or a Detroit Pistons fan. Like, my professional basketball allegiance developed in my junior high years, more so. Growing up, I would have been a Chicago Bulls fan like every other kid in the 90s, and that was because watching Michael Jordan made me enjoy basketball. And then whenever he won the championship after his dad had died, that championship after his dad had died, I remember calling a friend, and like I was like 8 or 9 years old, and just crying and being like, this is so crazy. He misses his dad, and all the emotions going through that day. So all that to say, going to a Michigan State basketball game is something that I'd wanted to do, and I felt really embarrassed because I'd been to a University of Michigan basketball game, but not a Michigan State basketball game. And so Scott and I met in the greater Lansing area, went onto campus. He had gone to med school at Michigan State, so he knew the campus a little bit. We ate in the cafeteria, and I just kept thinking about, I know my dad talks about which was his favorite cafeteria, and back when my mom and dad went there back in the 70s. And in fact, my mom worked in one of those cafeterias, and she talks about their story of meeting each other. I'll let her tell that story. But so it was a lot of nostalgia, emotions going through my head, just leading up to the game. And so we're there, and we eat in the cafeteria. It was great food, and then we both decided, well, we got to get an ice cream cone, because I remember my dad always talking about soft serve ice cream at Michigan State was something he loved. And so I get my ice cream cone, and he gets his ice cream cone, and it is real feel really cold. My car's thermometer said -2 whenever I pulled into Lansing. And so we're walking from the cafeteria to the Breslin Center, and we're carrying our ice cream cones, and we're just joking about how the years have changed, and how in high school, how we would have thought about doing something or wouldn't have done something. Some people are like, oh, you guys can't, and you're eating ice cream and it's just cold. We're like, when you grow up in the Midwest, like, you're going to do it. That being said, I had an insane brain freeze right before we got into the Breslin, and it was actually really crazy that I didn't even mean to, but like I started tearing up inside of there. Now this isn't because um, it's not necessarily because Michigan State is a big deal or basketball is a big deal. I just kept thinking about how like Michigan State is where my mom found Jesus, and so I am always going to praise God when I think about Michigan State because that's where my mom found Jesus. I know that there are people that think about Michigan State and it's not a good connection, and I'm really sorry for those people who don't have a positive association. Um, yeah, Michigan State has a long laundry list of reasons why I think it's a great college, but the number one thing is just my mom found Jesus there. So they blew out Rutgers. It was insane. In fact, the highlight of the night wasn't any of the alley oops to Cohen Carr or to Cam or to Ward. Um, it wasn't even the 16 or 17 assists that Jeremy Fears had. It was because Michigan State won by almost a 2-to-1 point ratio. The highlight of the game was this student did a full court putt, and the putt goes 94 feet across the court. And the putt, what he's putting to was about the size of a door, and it had a cutout on the bottom that would have been, the stereotypical like mouse doorway that people have in the cartoons for in like Tom and Jerry. So it goes over, it hits like 3 inches away from that hole, bounces out 4 or 5 inches, and it has enough backspin that it then rolls and goes through the hole, and the stadium just went insane. Everyone was just so hyped for this kid, this college student who got $1,000 for making a 94-foot putt, and it was pretty cool. We were sitting so high up with our seats. They're fantastic visual seats, but anytime like the shirt cannon couldn't reach us, all that other stuff. But it probably would have been a highlight of the game if I had have caught a T-shirt. But so overall that was fun, and so Scott and I, Brittany was talking about me going to the game with someone, and she's like, yeah, I don't know when, I think it was actually to one of my daughters. She said, I don't know when the last time Daddy was able to do something with his best friend one-on-one, which is just that really interesting part of adulthood, is if your childhood friends, and like Scott and I send each other things on Facebook and Instagram all the time. So we have a continual stream of communication. But if you're not living within 30 minutes of each other, you're not going to spend a lot of time with each other. Like, it's just, you're not going to do a lot of one-on-one stuff. Like, anytime Scott and I have seen each other, essentially, since I got married, maybe even, would have been with spouses, and then he had a kid, and then every time we've come together, it's been like, hey, it's a family. The families are doing something together. You got birthday parties and gatherings. And so to do something one-on-one, I bring that up. Just that is a part of adulthood that you don't prepare for. My brother and I were out on a run over Christmas, and we just talked about how you're never prepared for going from being part of a team where you're doing runs with each other in high school or in college for his sake, and then you move away and you just never see each other. He talks about a high school reunion where him and one of our teammates who would have been in his grade, they had a great conversation, great interaction, and then they both essentially were like, we don't know when we'll see each other again. And it was just sad, but it was part of the reality of adulthood is your whole life's schedule has just altered. It looks different. And it looks different because you're able to sometimes do things that are your priority, but most often you have recentered your kid in your life. And your career dictates some of what you're able to do, but your life revolves around what your kid is doing or kids. And so you have precious little free time. Like, we chose a Saturday noon game knowing that the amount of time it'd take to drive back to our respective homes would need to be early enough that both of us could help our wives put the kids down. Now, both of us have wives who are incredibly capable of helping putting the kids down without us, but the capability versus the responsibility of a dad trying to be there and be present. So it was actually it was something that I had scheduled before all of Bennett's basketball season had come out, and so it was really sad because I had to miss 2 of her 3 basketball games that morning. And thankfully, there's a tournament now that's going to be scheduled at the end of this month, so I didn't miss her last games. But just adulthood is you try to schedule things and fit things. The Michigan State basketball schedule has a whole season put out at once. Elementary basketball seasons aren't necessarily going to be as well organized for schedule-wise, just dealing with elementary schools. But tonight, I will be playing basketball against my oldest daughter, and I'm looking forward to it. In fact, I'm going to get off camera for a half second. Someone dropped off a basketball for her. The sound of hands hitting basketballs is one of the best sounds ever. It was actually funny. I was carrying this ball to my office after Dennis gave it to me, and this was a ball that his daughter had used, and I was like, I'm actually one of those sentimental guys that's like, I want to honor the legacy of the basketball, and he's like, oh, you're too kind. And then people were kind of like, you're really happy. I'm like, literally, if I have a basketball in my hands, my mood gets so much better. So I'm looking forward to tonight. I made a joke earlier this week whenever I picked her up from practice that, no one's scoring points in my house, in my paint. And that's not going to happen. I mean, I'm going to try to play the appropriate level for playing against 4th grade kids. So I don't know how to play well against elementary kids since I haven't played basketball in a long time. Me going easy might just look like a bunch of air balls, and me going as hard as I could just look like a bunch of air balls. I'm not going to be the guy who blocks every shot of a kid. That person needs to just go home. But it's cool. I think this is a really neat opportunity to play basketball with her. I think she's going to love this basketball. It's a Wilson Evolution advanced microfiber composite, and these are like game ball. Like this is what you play the actual game with. It has a nice feel, a nice bounce. So super excited. And for the people who only know me as the cross country and track coach, like basketball, I love basketball so much, and it might come as a surprise to some people that basketball is actually the thing I care the most about whenever I was spent for most of my life. In fact, I didn't hunt growing up because that's basketball season. Like, I wanted a basketball in my hand. I didn't want a gun in my hand. I wanted to shoot hoops, not kill squirrels or deer. Though I did have to end up helping my dad skin deer and gut deer, and help process the animals. Which, by the way, I know this might alienate some people, but squirrel chili and squirrel quesadillas are amazing. You got to cook squirrel well, but it's really tasty. So anyhow, it's just interesting thinking about life growing up. How do you handle the different stages of life, adulthood, parenting, watching kids, and also something I dealt with a little bit in Astoria, and I'm dealing just even more with now, is knowing when it's your place to say something. So like a lot of college kids, you've moved, you're not in your hometown. Usually when you get a career, you're not in your hometown, you're not where you grew up. And so then whenever anything happens where you're from, people, you're always like, what do I say? And I remember in 2020, during that summer that we all want to forget, just that question of when do you speak? What do you say? What do you say whenever you watch something that seems so terrible happen? And a lot of people, their advice is just stay in your lane. Speak whenever you're asked a question. And then some people say, well, if you don't speak up about something, I remember during 2020, many different things. People are like, well, if you're quiet, then you're just approving of everything. And I want to just take a step back on that. I think as human beings, we are made for conversations and we are made for relationships. I was listening to a conversation with a sociologist, Ryan Burge, and just talking about how churches used to be full of every sort of person on the political spectrum, and now, 25 years after that point, churches have like self-selected to be more singular in their thoughts of politics. You go to your church that leans left, you go to your church that leans right, you go to your church that they condemn you if you're a Democrat, you go to the church that they condemn you if you're a Republican, and that hasn't historically been the case. And I think about how we err in the current moment, as I'm online doing a podcast, we err in the current moment thinking that the predominant and the best or the most valuable way to speak to people is via blog posts, Facebook posts, Instagram posts, and I think we overestimate the value of those and we underestimate just the simple conversations with people. And I think we also get so focused on things that, to go back to the stay in your lane comment, I think we do often get so focused on ideas or concepts or conflicts that aren't within our realm of contact that we forget, like, there's people that we interact with daily that they can use our time and energy, and that it would be more valuable to build a strong relationship with people inside of your neighborhood and inside of your church, inside of your dorm room, inside of your class, and know how to care about their problems and their issues instead of being hyper-focused on something outside. Now, they're not in contrast to each other. You can care about something nationally or globally and care about your neighbor, but there seems to be something that is shallow or has a not much of a strong ring to it if you say you care a lot about an issue, but you don't even know your neighbor's last name. And I don't speak this to condemn people. I mean, one of the things that I'm most proud of my parents for is they challenged us to know people, and they said whenever someone comes new to the church, be the first person to shake their hand, ask them their name. And then also just, we had a game, and our family did, whenever we went to Walmart or Kroger or Kmart, but Walmart's the best place for the game. We had the game to see who knew the most people's names. So who knew the most people at Walmart? And we were in a small town. Sturgis, Michigan's 10,000 people, and it was crazy because if you're in a competitive family, you're like, well, I need to know people's names. And so with, like, if it was a classmate, like you'd like kind of challenge people, like, oh, you have to like actually know someone's first and last name for some people. Like, is it someone that you know who they are? And so, like, because we were competitive, it's like, well, I need to know everyone in my class. I need to know everyone in the school. And so then you would be working hard to figure out everyone's names. And so on the downside is we wouldn't always be like, hey, Fred, if we saw Fred, because if we were walking beside the cart with our sibling, we didn't want to alert our sibling to knowing that Fred was there, and then our points would be neutralized. But all that to say, there's incredible value of caring about things nationally, things internationally, even things that are statewide or regional, but make sure you're knowing the issues of the people around you. And that's something that I'm learning and trying to figure out this mommy, and to know how to care for people here. I think there's people in this church that do an outstanding job of knowing everyone. David, I feel like he knows every single person within a 40-mile radius of the church. And I also think Bennett's basketball coach, he's done a great job of, just seems like, knowing and getting his kids really plugged into different things, and then doing a good job of bending over backwards to make sure that other kids are getting the opportunities along with his kids. So all that to say, if you're confused about anything that's going on nationally or internationally, have a conversation with someone. Have a conversation. Don't try to prove a point. like ask questions. Say, hey, this event happened. How do you feel? Or what do you think happened? And then talk about news sources and talk about whether or not, if you're only reading one news source and they're only reading one news source, chances are you're both probably having a very shallow view of what actually happened. There's the statement that whenever two people are talking, there's one person's view, another person's view, and the truth. And so with a lot of news events, you just got to make sure you're not leading with rage. You're not leading with posture of having to defend or whatever. You as a human being, your identity should not be tied to a political party, should not be tied to even your nationality, shouldn't be tied to a sport, shouldn't be tied to a career, shouldn't be tied to an income. You should be who you are without those things, and those things are things that are in orbit of who you are, but they are not defining who you are. Which I got a list of things I've thought about talking about today. I've been running on the treadmill. I call it the dread mill, and because I just despise running on the treadmill enough that I usually don't go very far. I've been figuring out doing like 1 minute repeats on it at highest speed and doing little intervals like that. At least appeases my brain of thinking I worked out. The push-up challenge that I started at the start of the year is going well. And I'm super excited about that. Sunday, this is something, so if you were living in the Midwest, well, if you were living in the Midwest, you were getting one messaging, but if you were living in the East or Southeast, you were receiving like these snow alerts for like a week straight, weather alerts, things that are telling you this is going to be terrible. And Scott and I were like, hey, is Saturday even going to be able to happen? Like, will the roads be drivable? And so I packed all this extra stuff, and just to make sure that if I got stranded, I filled up my tank before I left, filled up my tank after, leaving Michigan State, like full tank in case something terrible goes wrong. Yeah, I had water, I had food, I had extra layers. Like, what would, make sure you're prepared. It wasn't snowing Saturday, like during the day. The roads were fine. It was super cold. Roads are fine. Got back into Ohio. Roads are fine. No snow. Brittany went out and she shopped Saturday, and it had started to snow, I think, around 8:30 or 9 o'clock here in the greater Toledo area. And people had been asking me, so therefore, David and I were having this conversation of what do we do? Because we are not in a level 2 weather alert, so we're not going to cancel right now. But there's the fear of snow coming. And so we have an 8:30 service, and then we'd have Sunday school in between, and then we have a 10:30 service. And David, I think, came up with a great idea. I signed off on it of, we're going to do an 8:30 service, and unless it gets worse than a level 1, and people are invited to come, but that is going to be recorded and then re-streamed for the 10:30 service. And we had 14, give or take, brave souls that were here on Sunday, and the weather, it was pretty snowy. I did not drive because my little 2002 Prius is not designed for snow, and I also wasn't really wanting to drive our van in case Brittany needed to do something in case of an emergency. So David picked me up. He's got a big 4x4 truck, handled the snow fine, but I started walking. I texted him, I'm like, hey, I'm going to start walking first. I'm too Midwest. Like, you cannot pass up the crunch of fresh snow. And then when he picked me up, I was like, I followed your footprints. They were the only set of footprints. Which I have a Star Wars hoodie that I was wearing prior to that, and I feel like that's a good time to make either a Stormtrooper or Sand People joke for people who know Star Wars. So I guess I'll say insert Star Wars joke there about single file or single set of footprints. But so we drove back. The roads were pretty bad after the day, but we recorded our Acts 5 sermon conversation after that, and we got, like I said at the start of this video, we got into the weeds, but that's part of the beauty of of my job. That's part of the beauty of preaching and teaching, is figuring out how to have a sermonic idea and how do you preach that idea, and allowing the text itself to be forming this idea, and then prayerfully considering what are the needs of the community that I'm in right now, and how does this text meet the need of my community in the immediate, as well as a just truth that the congregation needs. That's one of the hardest parts too, is knowing that our sermons are recorded and live streamed. There's always sometimes an urge to preach bigger than your audience, which if you followed Mark Driscoll, I think his downfall was he preached to his congregation, and then he started preaching outside of his congregation, and his already prideful self got really aggressive, and he then made himself the center of his orbit, and he started trying to preach to everyone who would listen. And when you're preaching to make an audience, you're missing the point of preaching, because preaching is about expositing the text to your congregation, meeting the needs of that time. And sometimes also as a pastor, you're going to preach a sermon that you feel like the Lord led you to preach, and you might not hear a single response, positive or negative, about that sermon. And it's not in your hands. It's, I've talked to many people over the years where, it's like a pastor says something in their sermon, and someone comes up and says, "Oh, I needed that sermon so bad." And you're like, "Oh, what part of the sermon?" And they'll say something, and the pastor didn't even realize it was part of what they said. It's a peripheral point to a peripheral point. It's an allusion to something, but that's what the Holy Spirit used to meet that person's need. So you have the crafting aspect of the sermon, but then you also have the beauty of the fact that you are studying a well-crafted document that stands inside of 2,000 years of history, and that document is sitting inside of a social setting, it's written in a grammatical setting, and a literary setting, and then there is, when studying the book of Acts, there are allusions to previous books, there are direct quotes from previous books, and so you're tracing these echoes, and then you're trying to figure out, how is this passage then developed in the rest of the book. And so you do all this book study, this nerdy stuff, and you're like, I love this, and I could talk about this passage for 4 hours, but I have 25 to 30 minutes to give a message. And so then you give your message, and I'm just super glad that David and I are doing this. He asked me my thoughts, and I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And I hope we don't stop it. Both of our schedules get crazy enough that we might not have a good day to have a conversation together about a sermon. So last week worked out well. I did not like canceling the 10:30 service. He didn't like canceling the 10:30 service. As a pastor, it's always hard canceling a church service. I hated canceling catechism. I hated canceling youth group, where especially because we had 2 weeks off for Christmas, and then I was gone to Great Wolf Lodge the previous week, so it's I miss seeing the kids that I'm teaching in catechism, and then that we're doing the Sunday night youth group. I want to go through 1 Peter with them. And so as a pastor, you weigh the value of asking people to risk themselves coming, to also then the fact that there are people who won't come, even if a risk is overcomable, is able to be overcome. Not sure if the able gets added on or whatever. So canceling service is something that I know some small churches in some small towns, the policy is hey, we are never canceling, but we are telling you, if you don't feel like coming, stay home. Because I remember in Astoria, it was hey, the last thing you ever want to do is to cancel a service, and that information to not be known by everyone. So then someone drives all the way to church, they risk their life, they risk their car, they risk, all these things, and they come to a locked door. And so there's all these different things. So we made sure that we put out information. You have emails, you have Facebook posts, you have texts, you have calls, you call the people that you aren't sure that they're going to get all. And so to anyone out there who's had to figure out, do we cancel for weather? I sympathize with you, and it's not always fun. But hey, that's 30 minutes of me rambling, and I want everyone who hears this to know that Jesus loves you, and the love of Jesus is what compels me to do what I do. The love of Jesus is what compels me to say I'm wrong, because the love of Jesus pushes me to be better, and I'm thankful for anyone and everyone who listens to this, and I'm so thankful for also the wise voices that I listen to, whether by podcasts or the conversations with David. Keep moving forward, and be patient with yourself, be patient with the people around you, have hope for the future, even whenever things look incredibly frustrating or dark or grim. Good can still happen and will still happen. Have a good day. Bye.